You track your health KPIs. I was taught by functional doctors and also my friend, Dr. J, that you really need to measure your health KPIs if you want to increase your testosterone, if you want to drop the body fat, if you want to have more energy, better brain function, if you want to pack on the muscle. Because if you've got no clue what's happening under the hood, you're in a V8 engine, you've got no clue. You could have downgraded that V8 that you started out with to a 4-cylinder. So what I've learned is that we've got to start tracking these KPIs, because if we don't, it's just like we walk into a dark room and there's a dartboard on the wall, and you got these darts and you just start throwing the darts, hoping that you'll hit the fucking bullseye. You turn the light on and it's just like, shit, I'm fucking all over the place. You've just got no clue. Because just one of these health metrics, health KPIs, can, really significantly lower testosterone. Still might be 500 or 600, but you could probably produce a lot more. And if it's way down low, you've obviously got a lot of KPIs that are just out, and you have to understand what they are. So basically, what's your objective? My objective is one simple thing: to stay in my prime. That's where I want to be. So that's my objective, because that makes everything easier. Fat loss, testosterone production, motivation, brain function, all of it just makes everything a lot easier. Why handicap yourself? So you've got to get a comprehensive blood lab done. So you measure and you find out where you're busted inside, and that creates a framework so you'll know how to optimize the ones that are out. And there's two important things that I was taught by the functional doctors. You got standard labs, which are not optimal, not even close. And then you got functional labs, and that's where you feel your best. And then once you get that framework done, you can create a strategy to get more performance over the next 2 to 3 months. And then you evaluate, and that's like round one. And you'll find that takes 2 to 3 months. And then you'll do your next round of blood work, and that's going to give you the measurements for the framework to optimize. Rinse, repeat until you are where you want to be, that peak performance. So on screen here, actually, I'm going to play this video from Dr. Ken Berry, and it just goes to show you that you might go to your health professional, and this is what can happen.
Pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic, and they have no idea. Literally do not know this, even though they're damaging it. They're increasing their risk of erectile dysfunction, of heart attack, of stroke, of blindness, of every organ in their body shutting down and ceasing to function. But since their doctor says, well, you're relatively skinny, Mark, you've got a little belly pooch, but that's it. No big deal. We're not going to check any blood work on you. And you feel like shit. You got no energy. You got no get up and go. You're gaining weight. You feel like crap. But your doc says, well, you're skinny, therefore you're healthy, and they send you on your way. Every guy with.
So that's what you face when you go to the current system. So you got to think of the current system as it's just not going to optimize you. Not even close. They're not going to get you in optimal ranges. They're not going to create a framework and a strategy. And they're not going to allow you to come back and do round 2 to get into peak physical and mental and emotional performance. So we've got to look at the system as it's not optimal. It's not ideal. And if you want ideal results, you have to find out how to do that. And that's what this video is all about. Now, one of the biggest problems that the scientists and functional doctors are finding is that insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome is way up there in the 90 percentile. So over 90% of people have some form of metabolic syndrome. So this is basically going to be shutting down your testosterone and your performance. And one of the simplest and easiest blood metrics you can start to test now without even getting blood work done is your fasting blood glucose. And I'll show you the levels that you should be at based on the current academic papers and what the functional doctors say you need to be at for optimal health, not just okay health, optimal. So fasting blood glucose, as you can see on this research paper here, an underestimated risk factor for low testosterone and cardiovascular disease. And this is a 22-year follow-up study of healthy non-diabetic men. So, it's been happening for a long time. The testosterone's been plummeting. We've found it harder to get the body that we want. We don't have the energy. We don't have the get up and go. We just feel like shit. Dr. J, when I started to work with him back in 2020, he pointed me to this study here, and he said that testosterone has been plummeting since the 1940s, but so much more in the 1980s. In the 1980s, it started to decline 1.6% per year, and that's a massive 16% per decade. And in 1987 here, a man my age, and I'm 52, we're about 525, kind of around about that there. And if you have a look at this here, percentage of obese adults in the United States. In 1987, we were still pretty lean. And you come to 2002, we're just over the 400, and you can imagine what it is now. And just to show you the scope of the problem, look at this study. And this was done with men, 3 cohorts, 15 to 19, 20 to 29, and 30 to 39. Now, in 2000, they ran about, I guess, average those out about 600. 2016, average it out, it was kind of like there, 430 maybe, I look around about there. And that's not good. As Dr. J said to me, you need to be 500 and above, not 500 and below. And that cohort, all these men, they're suffering the symptoms of low T. So what are the symptoms of low T? Well, let's have Dr. Ken Berry explain what that means to us.
But just focusing on low testosterone, the classic symptoms are fatigue, no get up and go, no drive, no drive anywhere, no drive at the office, no drive, in the yard or the garden, no drive in the bedroom. Just you don't really care about doing a good job at anything. You just kind of you get by to get along. Weight gain is very common. You're tired all the time, yet you don't really sleep very deeply during the night. Belly fat is a huge. Even if you're not overweight, you're still going to have a little belly pooch. It's very classic. You can start to develop man boobs, which I have a YouTube video. You know that video is
that was me. Yeah,
2 million views or something, because having man boobs is so common in the world today that there are over 2 million men who've watched my video on YouTube about it, if not 3. All those things are symptoms of low testosterone, and there's a long list of prescription medications that you might be taking from your doctor, your doctor that you trust, that could actually be plummeting your testosterone levels. I've got a YouTube video about medications that lower testosterone in case any of you guys.
As you can see there, it's a twofold problem. They're not really going to check your levels anyway, your KPIs, the important ones. And if they do, they kind of brush off low testosterone. And you get to a place where it's starting to drive a lot of pathologies, as you see here. Now, this is just insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. So to understand the scope of the problem, if we're not paying attention to these important KPIs, and I'll unpack what they are as we progress, this is another functional doctor, Dr. Mark Heyman. Listen to this.
Cancer, primarily is caused by food and environmental toxins. So food, what kind of food? Sugar. We know clearly that pancreatic cancer, colon cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, many of the common cancers, pancreatic cancer, are caused by something called insulin resistance, which is prediabetes or poor metabolic health. 93.2% of Americans are in poor metabolic health, meaning they have some form of prediabetes or insulin resistance. They have high blood sugar, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, they're overweight, or they've had a heart attack or stroke. And that poor metabolic health is driving all these conditions, whether it's cancer, heart disease, diabetes, dementia, depression, infertility, so many different things, even acne. Our food system is the biggest killer on the planet.
Dr. Mark Heyman there. So, the functional doctors, I'll show you where you need to be shortly, but this is no joke. It's a pretty big deal. And that's problem 4, and I'll show you the other problems right here in a moment. But as Dr. Ken Berry said, once you got these pathologies, and what are they? Well, we're talking about high blood pressure, hypertension, cardiomyopathy, enlarged heart or heart disease, and your fat cells. They're leaching pro-inflammatory cytokines, which are really crushing you. Then your muscles, you've got lipotoxicity and glucose intolerance and diabetes. Then your liver starts to tap out. You've got cirrhosis, you've got a fatty liver, insulin resistance directly in the liver there. And your central nervous system, your moneymaker, that starts to tap out. You've got Alzheimer's, memory issues, cognitive impairment, and cerebral degradation. Then a lot of cancers, as Dr. Mark said there. And you've also got chronic kidney disease, and if you're a lady, polycystic ovary syndrome. So that's a big consequence, as you can see. And as Dr. Ken Berry said, that's going to drive you to go into the medical system. And they'll say the only way we can solve this problem is to give you big pharma drugs. It's like a money pit for them. So the functional medicine says you can fix this problem if you haven't left it too late. So the other consequences are quite simply, it'll eventually drive insulin resistance, all of that shit. But insulin resistance will crush your testosterone. So that's problem one. Now, problem two is when insulin is up chronically, along with cortisol, stress, xenoestrogens, free fatty acids, your trigs, inflammation, and estrogen itself is a double whammy. All of your androgens, testosterone, dihydrate, DHEA, and all the other weaker androgens there, they go through this process called aromatization. So what does that mean? Well, your testosterone goes through aromatase, turns into estrogen, and you go into fat storing mode, and you feel like shit. And that's going to eventually drive hypogonadism. So quite literally, the factories that make your man juice, your testosterone, those poor boys, they scale down, they atrophy and shrink. And then problem number 6 is, if you want to pack on the muscle, when you've got all of those issues, metabolic syndrome, not only is it very difficult to put on muscle, but because you're producing a lot of oxidative stress and a lot of cortisol and glucocorticoids there, it actually shuts off mTOR. This is the pathway that builds your muscle, right? Mechanistic target of rapamycin, and it shuts it down. And then it also wastes your muscle protein through branched chain amino acid degradation. So it continually feeds the beast. And problem number 7 is it drives a lot of heart disease because, as Matthew Walker here, sleep scientist, says, so when you sleep deeply, you release a lot of growth hormone, 200 to 300% over the top of what you normally would. But guess what? When your glucose is up and your insulin is up, it inhibits growth hormone release. So why, my friends, is that a problem? As he says in his book here, Why We Sleep, without growth hormone replenishing the lining of the blood vessels called the endothelium, they're shorn and stripped of their integrity. Vessels rupture, heart attack, and stroke become common. So you can see how that's driving it. Now, this is a pretty significant study. Fasting blood glucose, an underestimated risk factor of cardiovascular disease, but all that metabolic disease that you're suffering through right now, low testosterone included. So I'll play this video. This is a video that Dr. J and I put together with a small group of men, and it was just really trying to emphasize the importance of checking your fasting blood glucose. Dr. J did his 5-year PhD in hormones and cholesterol, and when he did his investigations on cholesterol, he found that fasting blood glucose was a major predictor of all-cause mortality, significantly increases it. Listen to this.
Yeah. Once you start getting, it says in the pink there, once you start getting above 85, not 100, like the normal range says, it's 85, significantly higher mortality rate, cardiovascular disease, for example. Pretty much everything in health goes down once you get above 85, if you're chronically above 85.
Yeah. And one of the main...
That doesn't matter what the age, but that doesn't matter what the age is. I've looked at different age studies. You could be 5 years old. If you're above 85, your blood sugar is too high. If you're 80 years old, your blood sugar is above 85, it's too high. It doesn't matter what your age is.
And I think, yes, one of the main mechanisms of actions is so I'll leave that short there. The video went on for a bit longer, and he just started to talk about the deleterious effects of elevations in blood glucose. So 85 and below is the butter zone for fasting blood glucose, and a lot of people are not there. So I'm going to give you strategies in this today to show you how to start fixing for that. And here it is. So basically, what we need to take off the table is all of that dysfunction there, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And it's a pretty big deal because if you're not tracking this, you've got no clue, as I mentioned on the beginning of it. So we've got to go through this linear progression model here, these KPIs. We've got to track them. We've got to make small iterations to get back to health. And that's what functional medicine is all about. We don't use drugs. We use diet optimization, lifestyle changes, and tracking these KPIs. Now, this is pretty hard to hear. Dr. Ken Berry said this to me a little while ago. Listen to this.
Absolutely. It's often too late by the time you've become financially comfortable.
Yeah.
Very often you've done so much damage to every tiny artery in your body that you're now stuck with permanent erectile dysfunction or permanent forgetfulness or permanent insomnia, permanent shortness of breath, chest pain, right? Gut issues. You've done so much damage. Some of it can't be taken back. And that's why I'm so active on social media, constantly reaching out and trying to help people, because once it's too late, you might regain a little bit of that function, but it's never going to be like it once was, and it's never going to be like it could have been. And that's very sad if you think about it, that somebody's basically handicapped for the rest of their life, physically or mentally or emotionally, because of bad dietary decisions that they made for the first few decades of their life that they didn't realize were bad decisions because they had never been trained properly.
Exactly. That's why I work with functional doctors and also Dr. J to figure this out and get it right, and then start to track these KPIs to make sure I'm moving in the right direction. So what we're going to talk about today, blood labs, what's called the omega-3 index, how to check for that and how to get it back to health, nutrient status, food sensitivities, gut and liver health, and stress. Like if cortisol goes up, it's going to dump a whole bunch of glucose into the blood serum. And that, my friends, can drive insulin resistance and diabetes. So this is unstable blood glucose. So it's an unstable you. Your emotions are shit. Your energy is shit. Your testosterone is shit. What we want to get back to is stable blood glucose. And does that mean you can't have carbohydrates? No, of course you can have carbohydrates. That's definitely, you should be having carbohydrates. But what we want to get away from is this unhealthy cortisol pattern. So for a lot of the people that we've helped, once we do a 24-hour cortisol check, when we find that they're just not where they should be, they're producing about 2 times the cortisol that they should be producing. So what we've got to take away from this is it's not just the blood work, food, lifestyle optimizations, it's also the mindset. If you don't have a strong mindset, cortisol will go up and it's going to fatigue you and crash you. So what I'm going to do now is just quickly talk about this personal carbohydrate threshold, because definitely genetics plays into it. Now, this is the worst case scenario. This is a DNA profile, and this poor individual has got really poor glucose tolerance. Now, that doesn't mean they can't have carbs. They certainly can. And this lucky individual here, which is me, can have a lot of carbohydrates. So the first thing that we're going to look at today is getting our blood labs in optimal ranges. And I'm going to give you a tool about how to start optimizing blood glucose. As you see here, it's more stable. And insulin here, how we're going to start to lower it. We don't want this big rise and fall in glucose and insulin. We want stable insulin and glucose. And yes, you can certainly have carbohydrates. So I'll show you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about when it comes to functional labs, optimal, and standard labs, not optimal. So when you get your inflammation checked, one of the metrics you can look at is CRP, C-reactive protein. Now, according to functional doctors, and this this legend here, Chris Masterjohn, who's got a PhD in nutrition. When you've got chronic low-grade inflammation, your CRP will be between 1 and 3, and that's not good. And if you're over that, you've got acute inflammation. And if you're over 10, that's some bad shit you want to get out of there. So the problem with inflammation is that when you do a standard lab, they'll say anywhere from 10 or even 3 and below is okay. That's not okay. You need to get it 1 and below. Now, here is where you need to get it. High sensitive CRP. So this one here is 0.29. That is ideal because you're out of that chronic low-grade inflammation. Now, what's the problem with low-grade inflammation? Let's listen.
I mean, the problem with inflammation is it shuts off muscle growth. It basically tells your body you're in a stress state. So it's not a building state.
So that's Dr. J. So as you can see there, we need to get it 1 and below. Now, if you've got low testosterone, you will have that problem. You will have more inflammation. And the main reason for that is when testosterone comes down, inflammation goes up. Why? Because testosterone lowers inflammation. Listen to this. This is Dr. J speaking about that.
Very sensitive to low testosterone or inflammation.
Yeah, it's a paradox, isn't it? You need your testosterone high to mitigate the inflammation in the joints. The doctors don't tell you this, do they? They brush low testosterone off, and it's tragic.
Oh yeah, they've lowered the range, so they don't even think it's a bad thing to have low testosterone because they think it's okay testosterone. They don't even consider it low.
Yeah, when
it is low. But yeah, it's a good point. It's a negative feedback, meaning if your testosterone is low, your inflammation goes up, and then that lowers your testosterone even more, and that even increases your inflammation even more. It's a negative feedback.
Shuts off muscle growth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So definitely both of those things, right? To stop.
Okay. So again, the chronic inflammation, and this is chronic inflammation, right? Cardiovascular disease, brain disease, autoimmune disease, arthritis, cancer, lupus, fibromyalgia. You don't have any energy, you're fatigued. So that can certainly be a big problem. Now, another one hang on, before I talk about that, like this is a blood panel back from somebody that I was helping, and they weren't flagged because it was below that 10 or below the 3. But he had chronic low-grade inflammation, so we've got to work on that. So that's a KPI to fix, and it's really simple to fix that inflammation. Now, another one is elevations in homocysteine. Now, when you get your labs done, very rarely will they ever check homocysteine levels. Now, the reference range on a standard panel is about 14 and below. Now, functional labs says you need to have it 7 and below. So that's a massive juxtaposition there. And this is a dude that we were helping, 9.9, wasn't flagged. So he's got no clue. If you get your standard labs done, you've got no clue that that's bad because it's eventually going to drive all of these issues. So you got insulin resistance, diabetes, kidney, cardiovascular, migraines, cancer, bone, eyes, cognitive, hearing loss, infertility, depression. And the main causes of high homocysteine is vitamin status, lifestyle, genetic mutations like you see over here with the homocysteine, this SNP here, and drugs. So they're the main drivers of that. Here is another often underestimated and overlooked blood lab. It's called iron overload. So on a standard lab, they'll say between 30 and 400 is okay. Functional medicine says we need to get it between 50 and 100. So there's another big problem there. Now, a great book that you can get to start looking at these functional labs is in this book here. Why do I still have thyroid symptoms? And this gentleman here has got a PhD, DCMS, MMS, so pretty smart individual. Now, again, a typical laboratory range or a standard lab says thyroid stimulating hormone here can be between 0.5 and 5.5. Functional says that's not even close. We need to get THS between 1.8 and 3. So that's the butter zone. So basically, thyroid works in the butter zone there. If it's too high, no good, and too low, it's no good. So we have to work out where your thyroid hormones are. So now another big piece of the puzzle is what's called the omega index. So quite simply, when we eat food, it's got essential fatty acids. Now, omega-6 and omega-3 are included in those essential fatty acids. And the problem with Western food is it's packed full of omega-6, and there's nothing wrong with omega-6. We need it, and it's very little omega-3. So over time, and it only takes 12 weeks, what happens is you go into a pro-inflammatory state. And now we know that inflammation is a pretty big deal. So when you've got too much omega-6 and not enough omega-3, you don't have balance. And we can get back to balance in about 12 weeks. So on screen there, you've got low-grade inflammation. You're wasting your energy producing pro-inflammatory cytokines. You got serotonin depletion. So there goes your happy brain. And serotonin turns into melatonin for sleep, so you don't sleep deeply. Then you've got increased cortisol production. Then you've got decreased fluidity of the cell membrane, so your metabolism starts to slow down. And then you've got alterations in transporters and ion channels and receptors and enzymes in your moneymaker for dopamine and serotonin. So those two powerful hormones are out of balance. And here's some more research on the omega-6 to 3s. So when you've got a high intake of omega-6, which most people have, you will have leptin resistance. And leptin resistance will tank your testosterone and it will make you hungry. And you'll also have insulin resistance by default. And when you've got insulin resistance, you've got an upregulation of aromatase, which means that you're making low testosterone anyway. And then what little testosterone you are making goes through aromatase and turns into estrogen, and you go into fat storing mode and you lose your motivation to do the diet, you lose your energy, you've got inflammation, and it's just like, oh, fuck it, girl. I can never get there. I can just never get there. It's because you're not tracking these important KPIs. And to make matters worse, when you've got high omega-6, you've got a hyperactivity of what's called the endocannabinoid system. So on this research paper here, the endocannabinoids selectively enhance sweet taste. So when they're hyperactive, you're always going to sweets, then to salts, sweets, then to salts. Because the omega-6 turns into this metabolite called AEA here, or arachidonyl ethanolamine. And these receptors are hyperactive, and in the hypothalamus and limbic forebrain, they induce appetite and stimulate food intake. So even though you probably had enough to eat, you just have more cravings. So that can be a pretty big problem. Now, more research on this, and right here, this is how we're going to fix the problem over about 12 weeks, and I'll unpack that in a bit. As you can see here, human beings evolved consuming a diet that contained equal amounts of omega-3 and omega-6 essential fatty acids. Over the last 100 to 150 years, an enormous amount of omega-6 has been placed into our diet. So today in Western diets, a ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 ranges approximately 20 or 30 to 1 instead of traditional ranges of 1 to 1 or 2 to 1. So 30 to 1 and 10 to 1 is around about there. 10 to 1, 30 to 1 there. So you're in, that's not good. You're in the red, you're in the orange. All right? You're being warned. Right? You're being warned there. And what we want to do is get it ideally in the green. When you get it in the green, you move away from this state that one is prothrombotic, pro-aggregation, blood pressure. And it also increases blood viscosity. So that means thick, sludgy blood, vasospasms, vasoconstriction, blood pressure. And when you start to get back to balance towards the 1 to 1 or 2 to 1 ratio, you've got anti-inflammatory, anti-thrombotic, anti-arrhythmic, vasodilation properties. The benefits of omega-3 have been shown in secondary prevention of coronary heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, and renal disease, kidney disease, arthritis, colitis, Crohn's disease, and chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases like allergies and asthma. And another important lesson that I learned along my journey when I was researching these amazing fatty acids, the omega-3s, Burton Lintman, an NIH researcher who studies DHA, he said that you could not be a fighter pilot with low DHA in your brain because your brain is just too damn slow. It's the speedster of the cell. So the more DHA you've got in your brain, the faster and sharper your brain will be, and also the creation of neurotransmitters for higher thinking. And this is what Dr. J said about DHA, the omega-3 in the brain. Listen to this.
Good. And how do you fix that? Well, just make sure you got plenty of DHA in your body, fish oil.
Yeah.
You know, 1/3 of our brain, I used to do Alzheimer's research, Mark. I used to take out human brains, like I would do autopsies and stuff.
Right.
And if you dehydrate all the water in the human brain, 1/3 of it is DHA.
Wow.
You know, a huge amount. So it's super important for the brain. And if you're not pumping it up there properly, which is what this gene indicates, you need to make sure you got plenty of it in your system. Definitely a supplement to take.
So think of it as a building material for your brain, but also it's going to put you in a state of being anti-inflammatory. And another amazing thing that these omega-3s have now been shown in the research to do is help you pack on the muscle. So this is my omega index here. It's kind of off the charts at 19.55, so I'm somewhere down there. And that's one of the major benefits that I found is it's a lot easier to pack on the muscle. And it's also optimizing you for insulin resistance as well, putting you into an anti-inflammatory state. Now, another thing that these omegas do is they help you rip off the body fat, because what they are going to do, these omega-3s, is that they increase browning of adipose tissue, so your metabolism goes up. And by default, it increases mitochondrial biogenesis. Now, the mitochondria do a lot of pretty important tasks in your physiology. And here's just 3. The mitochondria are a necessary step to make testosterone. They produce the bulk of your energy called ATP, and they are the only place you can burn body fat. So if you're making brand new mitochondria by default because you've got your omega index over here, you're a better fat burner. Pretty much that simple. All right. So the next piece of the puzzle, legends, is talking about nutrient status. And this is just a fancy term for having optimal vitamin and mineral status. So I'm only going to cover a couple here. So one that's often overlooked is magnesium. And I'll show you what magnesium does in a moment. But let's just talk about it for energy production and fat loss. They've shown that if you have low serum magnesium, you will have insulin resistance and diabetes. You'll eventually go down that path. Now, the way that we produce energy is through ATP. But what has to happen to release energy like this match here is your adenosine is attached to a ribose and 3 phosphates there. So that's ATP, adenosine with the ribose and 3 phosphates. Now, magnesium here cleaves off one of these phosphates and just like that match, it releases energy. So if you don't have enough magnesium, you go into fat storing mode and your energy system's powered down. Now, that does not mean that you should supplement magnesium haphazardly. You'll have to work out what your nutrient status is. And if you want to know how to work that out, I should have information below this on another video where I've mapped that out for you. Now, what magnesium also is important for is here's just 14 of 300 mission critical jobs, just 14. Testosterone. You can't make testosterone without adequate magnesium. As we just explored, energy production, muscle function, nerve operations, antioxidant defenses, DNA, RNA repair and synthesis, electrolyte balance, heart health, maintaining rhythm and blood pressure, protein synthesis, glucose and insulin regulation, neurotransmitter release, mood regulation, immune system boost, learning and memory. So as you can see there, we've got to have adequate vitamin and mineral status. Now, the next piece of the puzzle are food sensitivities. If you've got food sensitivities, inflammation and cortisol will go up, which will bring down energy and testosterone and put you in it puts you into an inflammatory, low-grade inflammatory state. Now, a few of the food sensitivities that you could have, and here's just a few: nightshades. You could have a sensitivity to lectins. You could have the hemochromatosis gene, and you could have gluten sensitivity. And these are no joke. We've tested over 160 people now, and we're seeing that gluten sensitivity in over 80% of the people. And this is a big problem because it can cause gut issues. It can cause cirrhosis and rosacea for the skin. And it can also screw up your brain, your money maker. As I learned from Dr. Daddis and why my brain isn't working, when you've got this problem here, TG6, which is transglutinase 6, gluten can trigger immune reactions to TG6, leading to autoimmune destruction of brain and nervous tissue. So it's no joke. And a lot of people think, oh, gluten, yeah, whatever. And the interesting thing about gluten is it's also got lectins in it. So it's kind of a double whammy for a lot of people. And that's because 65% of the people that we've tested have sensitivity to lectins. And listen to what lectins can do.
The lectin is the big one. That's a 4-fold higher risk of heart disease, even as a plus minus, the SELE.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah.
Yeah, so lectins are going to trigger a lot of damage to the arteries and damage to the gut. I would recommend avoiding grains. Yeah. Grains are the major source of lectins.
Yeah.
And his gut's very sensitive to grains also with the gluten. And he's got a thyroid gene that comes up later with gluten as well. So I would say just take off the grains,
And you're not told to do that by the system, are you? So if you've got this lectin issue with gluten, that's a big increased risk for, all those pathologies that we talked about earlier there. And you can also have a hemochromatosis risk. And you can also have what's called an SOD2 risk. And this is separate to hemochromatosis. And we see this a little bit, and it's pretty significant. So listen to this from Dr. J.
Heart disease. Yeah. So this one gene, there's really the two genes here, but the SOD2 gene is not a risk unless her ferritin is high. But if her ferritin is high, this gene gives her a 10-fold higher risk of heart disease, which is super high risk.
10-fold, yeah.
We want that to be 0-fold. So you got to make sure the ferritin is between 50 and 100, not just 50 to 500 or some kind of crazy nonsense.
Yeah.
Has to be optimal, not just normal in this one.
Yeah. Right. And this is where it comes back to standard labs versus functional labs. The standard lab will say up to 400 and ferritin is okay. And think about that. If you have this gene risk, that's a 10-fold increased risk for heart disease. You tack onto that the lectin risk there, that's another 4-fold. So you've got 14-fold increased risk for heart disease. And the system will blame cholesterol, they'll blame red meat, they'll blame all these scapegoats when it could, in fact, be this. And that's the point, right? And you could also have a nightshade and insecticide gene risk like me. Listen to this.
With fatigue, you want to know what's causing fatigue. Here it is. Yeah, nightshades are definitely contributing.
So these nightshade, definitely contributing, but also the anxiety with the caffeine.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things. I mean, he's got the thyroid, which contributes to fatigue. He's got those estrogen genes.
Yeah.
He's got the vitamin D genes. They're definitely linked to fatigue. He's got the gluten sensitivity. He's got the CRP, which is, it's all, there's a lot of targets here, and he's got to dial them all in. Intermittent fast. And this is where caffeine actually comes back up, because this gene, it's involved in caffeine doesn't just break down with one single process in your body.
Mm-hmm.
There's multiple enzymes that are involved in breaking it down. So a little bit of it gets broken down, and then it goes down the line, and then it gets broken out a little bit more, and then it goes down the line. And this is on that assembly line where that's involved in breaking down caffeine, BCAE.
Yep.
So caffeine stays in his body longer because of this gene.
Right.
So therefore, it could trigger more anxiety.
Okay.
As you can see there, your food can trigger fatigue, anxiety, and make you feel like shit. And there's a lot of gurus out there that will tell you that, ashwagandha is pretty good. Well, if you got that gene, and about 35% of the people that we test have, including myself, it's a nightshade, so it backfires on you. So there's a lot of supplements you could be taking out there that are not working. They're moving you in the wrong direction. So that can be a pretty big issue. And more research on food intolerances right here, food allergies and intolerances, they're going to screw up your sleep because they're going to increase inflammation and cortisol, and they're also going to stimulate the overproduction of stress hormones, histamine, noradrenaline, adrenaline, and cortisol. So they can really screw you up there. Now, another big problem that I've found along my journey is right here, a leafy green salad. Dr. J and I both have this problem, and listen to this. Leafy greens screw me up.
Me too, man. That's what I was just going to say. Yeah, I've been wearing a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor.
Yep.
And even when I eat just like a leafy green salad with zero carbs, it spikes my blood sugar.
Is that inflammation?
Yeah, it's like your body's going into fight or flight. Yeah.
Yep. Holy shit. That is so important.
I know.
It's the same thing happens to me. Yeah.
Mark, I can, just for the experimental sake, I bought some Coca-Cola and some other bullshit stuff just to try it. I literally get more blood sugar spike from a small leafy green salad with nothing on it than I get from a can of Coca-Cola.
That's incredible. Like I'm the same. I've checked. Like I just cannot tolerate. I even get. Yeah. So you think you're doing the right thing. You're eating the right foods, and it's not. You won't feel this either, but you'll get a big spike in blood glucose. Why? Because cortisol goes up when you have a food sensitivity. Cortisol goes into the liver, and it tells glycogen to come out into the bloodstream as glucose to fight that inflammation. So that's what happens. And when you've got inflammation, cortisol actually tries to lower that inflammation. So a lot of foods and supplements can be short-changing you. So don't negate these food sensitivities. They are no fucking joke. They can crush you. And the older you get, the worse it becomes. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about, legends, is gut and liver health. This is absolutely huge. We have to have these two organ systems working very efficiently. Now, two big ideas here. If you've got gut dysfunction, you can take anywhere from 1 to 6 months to correct that. Now, if you've got gut dysbiosis and gut dysfunction, listen to this.
And so, come on down a little bit more. See, so right here.
Please. The bacteria. Yep.
Right. So that's where he said, this is your problem area, right?
Right. The bacteria. Yep. So,
and then, or go down further, right down there. Yeah. So you'll see, he's like, you're at these bottom levels. Like, this is like your immune, right? So that's where you talked about the immunity of gut and everything. So he's saying, this stuff is all, like, this is the problem.
The gut.
And so here's the bad news. Like this, you have this problem. He says, but the good news is we've identified it now, and it is correctable. He said it will take several months to correct it. And so
several months, and it can drive, you guessed it, insulin resistance.
Because of the insulin resistance that's created in your gut biome, metabolic stress and the inflammation that's created there.
So that's a big problem, because that's going to keep your glucose elevated until you fix this problem, right? So your fat loss will be harder. You won't make a lot of testosterone. Your muscle growth will suck. Your brain will be inflamed. You won't be able to think. You'll have brain fog. And the reason we know that is a lot of these hardworking functional doctors have worked this out, working with thousands and thousands of patients and using nutrition, DNA, and blood labs to fix the problem. You go into the current system, and what they'll do to you is prescribe drugs. So listen very, very carefully to this.
Some people that have immune reactions to gluten, they get severe brain inflammation when they eat it. They can even have their blood-brain barrier, gut barrier breakdown. They can set up the stage for neurological autoimmunity. They can decrease blood flow to their brain. as your brain gets inflamed, their messenger synaptic pathways become slower, and they just don't function well. And they walk in the healthcare system and they get diagnosed with chronic depressive disorder or chronic anxiety disorder or some other name.
Did you hear that? So they get misdiagnosed with depression and anxiety. And you've also got things in Western food called emulsifiers. So they're washing away the protective lining of your gut. So you can have food sensitivities. You can be eating foods that got chemicals, preservatives, and additives and emulsifiers, and they've been shown now to destroy the protective lining of the gut. And then you'll all end up with all of these problems that you see down here. Alterations of the gut microbiome, as we just learned. The protective lining of the gut is stripped away. The tight junctions open up. Food particles leach in. So you've got intestinal permeability, which isn't very good, and bacterial translocation. So bacteria that comes into you can go into the bloodstream. You can get infections and viruses. You will have low-grade inflammation. And as we now know, this can be a blood marker for you, along with the omega-6s and a whole bunch of food sensitivities. You will have glucose intolerance. You'll have fatigue and brain fog, and it can eventually lead to IBS. Then you go into the medical system. And as you can see here, IBS leads to anxiety and depression-like behavior. So psychological stress in the gut, and you've got the production of LPS and pro-inflammatory cytokines, and you've got a leaky gut. So as you can see there, the gut needs to be protected, and big food has no part of that because a lot of the foods that we eat are packed full of emulsifiers, detergents, preservatives, additives, and it's just a complete mess for a lot of people. Now, the last piece of this is the liver. Now, the liver is super important. It clears out all the toxins. It metabolizes estrogens to get estrogen back down at healthy levels. It does a lot of heavy lifting. And one of the main processes in the liver is called methylation. And it also is involved in phase 1 and phase 2 liver detox. And I'm not going to drive into how we're going to correct the liver today. I've spoken about that on other podcasts. But basically, in a nutshell, you need to think about having optimal vitamin and mineral status. So all the B vitamins. Then you've also got optimal protein intake, methionine, cysteine. Then you've got glycine, taurine, glutamate. And then you've got more B vitamins here, glutathione, the master antioxidant, to take care of the oxidative stress when the liver is trying to engage in detoxing you, phase 1 and phase 2 liver detox. And it's very important in keeping estrogen at healthy levels around the clock, because when estrogen goes a little bit too high, because your liver's sick, you're never going to have optimal testosterone production, fat loss, muscle growth, all of that. Now, the next piece of the puzzle is distress or emotional stress. Because when you have emotional stress, and scientists call this distress, you will dump a whole bunch of glycogen as glucose into the bloodstream. So you can be sitting down and you get your credit card bill and go, oh, for fuck's sake, man, Jesus Christ, how am I going to fucking pay that off? So your cortisol goes up. And because you're doing nothing but just sitting and dwelling on it, all that glucose has got nowhere to go. Why? Because when cortisol is at a certain level, it makes you insulin resistant. So all of that circulating glucose and also free fatty acids, your trigs, they're up. All your testosterone comes down, number 1. Number 2, muscle growth goes off. Number 3, what little testosterone you've got left goes through that process of aromatization and turns into estrogen. So this mental stress, legends, it has to be taken care of. And mental stress, stress-induced diabetes, psychological stress can lead to insulin resistance and full-blown diabetes. So let's just explore how that can start to play out. You have 2 stress pathways. You've got the fast path, number 1. So a nerve impulse comes down the spine, goes to the adrenals, you release a lot of stress hormones. That then increases your heart rate, your blood pressure, and converts liver glycogen into glucose into the bloodstream. So you've got big uptick in glucose. And because you're not doing anything, you're just sitting there stressing about it, You're packing on the fat around your abs, you're getting insulin resistance, you're shutting off testosterone, you're converting what little testosterone you got left to estrogen, you're shutting off muscle growth, and you feel like shit. And then that triggers the slow path here. It's called the HPA axis, and that happens in about 3 minutes. And in about 3 minutes, cortisol goes up through the roof. And the interesting thing about cortisol is it's got a 15-minute half-life, which means it needs a full 30 minutes to metabolize cortisol to come back down to baseline where it's healthy. But if you're stressed out and you've got negative thoughts, that's not happening. You get into a positive feedback loop. And when you're in a positive feedback loop, the science is super clear on this. You've got two big problems. Problem number one is you've got decreased cortical activity and you've got increased amygdala activity, fear, anxiety, aggression, all of that shit, and you've got cardiac arrhythmias. And you'll get into a place in 4 to 7 days whereby you get into a positive feedback loop where cortisol won't shut off. So you're constantly producing more and more cortisol. And that leads me to the other problem here, where you get stress-induced glucocorticoid resistance, very well established, so cortisol resistance. And then you're dumping a whole bunch of cortisol all day long, all week long, all month long. You're in this positive feedback loop. And then this is what happens to the amygdala. The stress overload creates more connections in the amygdala, which keeps firing and calling for more cortisol, even though there's plenty of the hormone available. The negative situation feeds on itself. The more the amygdala fires, the stronger that son of a bitch becomes. Now, the beautiful news is you've got two kinds of stress. What we need to leverage is what's called eustress. We need to get away from this distress. The eustress, your heart rate can be elevated. It's like, it's the weekend. You're like, fuck yeah, like this is some good shit. And you're excited and you're happy. But this is very transient, very short term for a lot of people. What we need to have to trigger is that eustress, especially when we're under pressure. That's the key there. Because when we can do that, my friends, when you get cortisol in the butter zone here, it stimulates testosterone production. But if it's too hot or too low, it inhibits testosterone production. And we now know that when it's over here, what little T you've got left goes through aromatase, turns into estrogen. So you become estrogen dominant. So if you do have a propensity for anxiety, you can fix that. I had panic attacks. I had performance anxiety. I had social anxiety. I was deeply, and I mean deeply, worried about what other people thought of me. And the key idea here is that you've got brain circuits like the stress circuits, the amygdala, the periductal gray, the insular cortex, and they make you feel like shit when you're in distress. And the amazing thing is when you know how to leverage eustress, guess what happens to the amygdala? Well, this is a neuroscientist speaking to what happens to that stressed out amygdala.
Another region we identified was the amygdala, and the amygdala is the fight or flight part of your brain. And here we actually found a decrease in gray matter. And what was interesting was that the change in gray matter was correlated with the change in stress. So the more stress reduction people reported, the smaller the amygdala became.
Did you hear that last part? Let me repeat. The smaller the amygdala became, you're less stressed out around the clock. So if you want to learn more information about how to do that, and it's no cakewalk, I've got 3 phases to solve that problem. And it's simple, trainable skills, but it takes time. It's no different than when you go to the gym, do the bicep curls to make the bicep larger and stronger. The brain works in exactly the same way. But we have to get that stress out of the body because it's really difficult to provide the brain trophic support to correct that issue. So that is distress. And just so you're aware, remember, all your androgens, testosterone, DHEA, dihydro, go through aromatase, turn to estrogen. When cortisol and inflammation is up, and you become estrogen dominant when you really want that. But the other problem is it'll eventually go and trigger hypogonadism. So your manhood is literally shrinking. And in a nutshell, you're just basically producing way too much cortisol all day long, and you're always being triggered to go to the amygdala like, fuck, my life sucks. That stuff. You feel, you've got regret, you feel bitter, you're frustrated, you've got anxiety and all of that shit. So that son of a bitch, the amygdala, is growing larger and stronger. You got decreased cortical activity. And I call that dark fuel. You make stupid decisions. You get to the end of the day and you're like, fuck this shit. I just don't care. I just don't care. I'm going to have that pizza. I'm going to have that beer. And it makes it all worse. So that's the mental stress aspect of it, legends. And yes, genetics plays into it. Like the COMT gene, this GAD gene here, like we have to optimize those, because when we optimize those, it makes clearing out stress hormones much easier. So in a nutshell, you got two things that change the way you operate. You've got brain circuits, the ones I just spoke of, an enlarged amygdala, which will be triggering distress, which will be triggering way too much cortisol, which will be tanking your testosterone, tanking your fat loss, and tanking your muscle growth, and tanking your life. When we need to be triggering eustress, and that's like, yeah, I get to do this. This is good shit. I love this. And that's the difference. One feels good. You feel joy and courage and you're excited, like Steve Irwin, those people. And distress, that's not the life I want to live, my friends. Legends, the final two things, sleep and also working out what your personal carbohydrate threshold is. So let's just have a look at sleep. I used to have insomnia, terrible sleep, and my genetics are not great for sleep either. And I didn't know everything that I know now. So basically, we have to take all of these things off the table to optimize sleep. And fuck yeah, it sounds like a lot, and it kind of is. And I'm just going to unpack a couple of things here. So food sensitivities, insulin resistance, and I've got more information about fixing that sleep. In the video, I think it's about 30, 40 minutes long. So I'm not going to go into that and unpack that today. If you want to learn how to get good sleep, information below. But I'll just, a couple of standouts here. Basically, insulin resistance, which is what I call a heavy clamp. And the reason for that is it takes a bit of time to walk back insulin resistance. And another big problem that we see quite often is food sensitivities. So we talked a little bit about food sensitivities. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, Mark, how the fuck and why does insulin resistance screw up our sleep? Well, as you can see here, let me just expand this and make it a bit bigger, bring it to front. Insulin resistance, and this is quite well elucidated in the scientific literature. It increases blood pressure through several mechanisms of action. Firstly, it increases renal sodium reabsorption, stress in the kidneys, activation of the sympathetic nervous system. Now that's stress right there. Stress hormones go up and they don't help you sleep at all. And then you've also got alterations in transmembrane ion transporters. So you've got mineral imbalances. And, if you've got insulin resistance a bit too long, and this isn't good, you got hypertrophy, which is enlarged arteries, vessels. So basically, insulin makes, instead of you having nice, relaxed arteries like this, it thickens the walls of the arteries, the smooth muscle, and it shrinks it. So you've got permanent high blood pressure. That's if you don't, look after this insulin and glucose conundrum. So you can see how insulin resistance does that. Now, what's going to happen basically is that, as I spoke about, the mindset, you got the stress brain circuits. They send a nerve impulse down to the adrenals, adrenaline, noradrenaline, or epinephrine, norepinephrine. They go up. Your heart rate goes up. Your blood pressure goes up. And then the liver dumps a whole bunch of glucose into the bloodstream. It starts as glycogen, converts into glucose, goes to the bloodstream. And insulin goes up and glucose goes up. And as you can see, that's not helpful at all. Then that, in about 3 minutes, triggers a slow path, which is cortisol. As I mentioned earlier there, cortisol's got a 15-minute half-life, which means it needs a full 30 minutes to metabolize all that cortisol to bring it back down to baseline so you can go to sleep. But the problem becomes this. How does the body get rid of that excess cortisol? You piss it out. So you've got frequent trips to the bathroom, frequent trips to the toilet. So if you've got like 2 or 3 trips to the toilet, more than likely you've got pretty severe insulin resistance there. So that's how that all plays out. Now, food sensitivities, they're no joke. All right, they're going to increase histamine, which is inflammation, which promotes the production of adrenaline, which is, all right, the fast path here. Right, it's going to trigger the fast path to trigger the slow path. So you're up and down and you don't sleep deeply. Now, if you want to pack on the muscle, legends, if you want to drop the body fat, you want to wake up charged to seize and attack the day like a beast, we need sleep. Listen.
Not getting sufficient sleep, 70% of all the weight that you lose will come from lean muscle mass, and not fat.
Right. The body, when it's fatigued in that way, wants to hold on to those fats.
Exactly.
Right?
Your body becomes stingy in giving up its fat. Mm-hmm. So in other words, when you are underslept, but you're trying to watch your diet, watch what you eat, you will lose what you wanted to keep, which is muscle, and you will gain what you wanted to lose,
which is fat. So, you're still going to lose weight, but a lot of it's from muscle. So you look skinny fat, you still got the belly pooch, you don't have the abs. So we need to get good sleep. If you want more information, just should be more information below. And one of the most detrimental things I believe that poor sleep does, as Matthew Walker says there, and as you can see, insulin resistance, your blood glucose will be elevated, so will your insulin levels there. So you're going to have fuck all growth hormone, pardon my French. So without growth hormone, replenishing the lining of the endothelium here, the protective shield of your arteries, the microvasculature in your moneymaker, your brain, shorn and stripped of their integrity, vessels rupture, heart attack and stroke become common. The mainstream blames cholesterol and meat and all of this shit when we can actually see the clear mechanisms of action. Like there's many different drivers of it, and the root cause is inflammation and metabolic syndrome. So another thing that growth hormone does, 3 things. First, rips off the body fat. It also works alongside testosterone to pack on the muscle. But what I'm interested in when I'm helping men recover and rebuild themselves, growth hormone rebuilds and repairs tissues and organs in your body. So we're talking about the brain, the heart, the blood vessels, as we just saw, the ball sack, the testes, and if you're a chick, the ovaries, the intestines and the gut, kidney, smooth muscle of the penis and the arteries, bone marrow. So you got great immune function, cartilage, so your joints aren't tapping out and you're getting knee and hip replacements, liver and central nervous system. So think about that. I mean, that is huge. You're missing out muscle growth, fat loss, and repairing your temple, your body, your V8 machinery, legends. Tragic. And, too high glucose and insulin, you're tapping out. So sleep, food sensitivities, liver and gut function, it's all pretty key there. Now, the next piece of the puzzle is sun. Now, if you're living under a rock, you probably haven't heard about Professor Huberman, and he speaks about this all the time. 10 minutes to 20 minutes in the morning, a bit of afternoon sun, a little bit of UVB, and it stops these 3 fucked up things. Number 1, your emotions, right? So this is huge. You got fluctuations in mood, irritability, anxiety, loss of empathy. We just don't give a shit. I'm like, fuck it, I don't care. Screw you, man. Then you got frustration, negative salience. So you've got more negative thoughts than you want to have. Then your cognition tanks, your moneymaker. So your wealth creation taps out because your cognition tanks, memory consolidation. So you don't learn very well. Attention, concentration, communication, decision-making, creativity, productivity, motor performance in the gym, smash out the workout, and social connectivity. So a lot of big downstream effects when you don't get that morning and afternoon sun, and a little bit of UVB. Do not get burnt, though. And paradoxically, when your omega-3 index goes above that 8%, it protects you from getting burnt. It certainly doesn't protect you completely, but you can go out in the sun longer, which is a great thing. Now, chronic. So this is the long-term consequences. Daytime sleepiness, micro sleeps at the wheel, cardiovascular disease, altered stress response. And if you're wondering if that's a good thing, no, that's not a good thing. Altered sensory thresholds, more pain, infection, lowered immunity, cancer, metabolic abnormalities. And that's not good either. Diabetes, depression, and psychosis. So 10 to 20 minutes within 1 hour of waking, a little bit in the afternoon, and a little bit of the UVB. And the UVB has been shown to hit the skin cells called the keratinocytes and increase testosterone and sex hormone production. So they've shown this now. This is all academic. So we have covered sun and sleep. The last thing that I want to show you how to do is to track this shit, right? And this is pretty easy. Number one, you can get a CGM, which is the best, or number two, you can get a glucometer. Now, your genetics certainly plays into this. Now, if you are unfortunate enough to be stuck with these genes here, that's the worst case scenario. And can you have carbohydrates, or do you need to be completely ketogenic? Of course you can have carbohydrates. You can have carbohydrates. You just need to track it, measure it. And it can take, a few months to 6 months for all the genes in glucose metabolism to be upregulated to a capacity where you can have a decent amount of carbs. Now, if you're like me, you are blessed. You can eat a shit ton of carbs. But, you've got to get a certain amount of calories, and you've got to think about macros. So how much protein, how much fat, and how much carbohydrate. For me, protein is king, and that's what my genes say. I can eat a boatload of protein. I get generally about 250 grams per day. I don't do that because if you have a polymorphism in your OTC gene, your urea and ammonia will go up, and that's toxic. So you've got to really know what you're doing when you're protein loading. And then fat. And now I get enough fat, and because I like to get a lot of carbohydrates, because I know that they boost my testosterone, my muscle growth, and paradoxically my fat loss when I have stable blood glucose. Protein is king, carbs are second, then fats. So I'm trying to get protein and carbs are about the same, then fats is the remainder there. And I'm focused on the right fats too, monos, omega-3s, stearic acid, things like that. So that is that's the macros there. Now let's just talk about carbohydrates and how the body kind of utilizes them. So basically, your cells can use that glucose to make ATP. Now, providing, as I mentioned in the nutrient status there, you've got magnesium. So magnesium binds to the phosphate, cleaves it off, releases energy. If you don't have enough magnesium, you go into fat storing mode. So you've got to make sure you've got adequate vitamins and minerals, not just magnesium, vitamin D, zinc, the copper ratio, all the B vitamins, vitamin A, retinol. So a lot of things go into it. Then the next thing that we can do with the glucose, if our insulin is up, we can make a lot of body fat. Now, testosterone comes down, our inflammation goes up. Or if we optimize testosterone, thyroid, then we can start to pack on the muscle, including growth hormone there. So that's the second thing, build fat or build muscle. And the third and final thing is the fuel tanks. So the fuel tanks stores glucose as glycogen in the muscle. So the more muscle you carry, the more carbohydrates you can safely eat. And the second disposal unit is the liver. It can't store a lot at all. So that's basically all you can really do with the carbohydrates that you eat. And they are not necessary for human survival, but the system would have you believe that. But they are certainly very advantageous when you don't saturate the liver and the muscles there. So let's unpack how we can start to think about that. So what you want to do is either get a CGM or a glucometer. Now the glucometer, basically you prick your finger, drop of blood, and you got this strip that goes in there. The blood is on the bottom, right? So the drop of blood's there, then it goes in there and reads it, and that's your fasting blood glucose. Now, the scientific literature, as I mentioned, requires that if you want optimal health, now we're not talking about just good health or okay health, optimal health, your fasting blood glucose should be stable at 85 or 4.7. So as soon as your feet hit the floor in the morning, you get out the glucometer, prick your finger, and it should be there. Now, if it's not, then you have some kind of metabolic dysfunction. And the only way to work that out is doing a comprehensive blood panel. Information below about that. But think through it logically, like how was your sleep? How was your mental stress the day before? How was your food intake? Did you eat some shitty food? Because that's going to keep your blood glucose up. You really need 2 or 3 days of optimal eating, sunlight, and stress management to work out if your fasting insulin is falsely elevated through stress and inflammation and food sensitivities or not. But if you do it right for 3 days, you should be there. Now, the second time that you want to check with the blood glucometer is about 15 or even 30 minutes before you have your first meal. And again, it should be around about there. Now, the caveat that I'll give you, cortisol is on the rise for about the first 4 hours of the day. Now, as we now know, cortisol makes you insulin resistant. So as cortisol is coming up and making you insulin resistant, the blood glucose, as we know, when stress hormones go up, they dump liver glycogen into the blood serum, and it's going to increase your glucose levels. So there's only 3 ways that you can fix that problem, and that's right here. And I'll come back to that. So we'll unpack that in a moment. So we'll solve that problem. But again, it should be between 15 to 30 minutes. It still should be around about there if you're doing things right. Stress is good, sleep is good, no food sensitivities, vitamin and mineral status, it should be there. Mental stress is on point. Now, the third and final time that you'd want to check is about 2 to 3 hours after your last meal. Now, that's more than enough time. 3 hours is ample time to get the blood glucose out of the blood and park it in the liver here, or the muscles. Now, if it doesn't come down and everything else the last 3 days have been fucking on point, you've just eaten too many carbohydrates over those days. So the liver and the muscle cells will be saturated with glycogen. So that last carbohydrate meal that you had, the glucose has got nowhere to go. You can't park it in the muscles and you can't park it in the liver because it's saturated. So remember, if the last 3 days have been great, you've been exercising, you've been getting sun, you've got your stress management under control, your nutrient status is good, then you should be good. And that's the pattern that you'd want to follow. Now, this is a very time-consuming way to do it with the blood glucometer, and the CGM is the best to get, a little bit more expensive, but it gives you real-time data. It's something there's a patch that you put on your shoulder, and it gives you real-time data to your phone, to an app on your phone there. So if you're serious about it, that's the best way to go. Now, another thing that you can do is what you see on screen there. And all this was just changing the order in which people ate their food. So this is a very important study here. And why is that? Well, this is done with people with pre-diabetes or insulin resistance. And their fasting insulin was about 22, so that's way high. So we want to get it between 2 and 5. And I've seen this over and over with blood labs from people that we've helped. When you get it about 8 and below, the testosterone comes up, the energy is more stable, the fat loss starts working. So that's good, but it's not great. We want to shoot for great. So we want to get it between 2 and 5. Mine hovers around about 3. And the tragedy that I believe in my heart is that the system will say for 25 is okay. So they won't even call it a problem, even though it's raging in insulin resistance until, you're over that 25. Then they'll say, okay, right, you tried your best, Mark. Listen, you did your best. And now you have to be on these big pharma drugs for the rest of your life. This is just what happens. And that's the current system. Functional medicine calls bullshit on that. Lifestyle changes. Then, you have to eat the right amount of carbohydrates that's appropriate for you. You have to be sleeping. You have to be exercising. You have to be getting the sun. You have to have good vitamin and mineral status. You have to have all your ducks in a fucking row. And that's as simple as it gets. So back to this study here. This is glucose, and this is insulin after meals. 3 tests. So the first test was eat your carbohydrates, then protein and veg. In the yellow, massive glucose spike, massive insulin spike. Not ideal. The second test was protein and veg together, then carbohydrates. So really good blood glucose, as you see there. But the insulin was up still a bit too high. Now, here's the key idea. The less insulin you produce day in, day out, the quicker you're going to get insulin sensitivity back. So the third and final part of the test, veggies first, and it coats the gut with a protective mesh so the carbohydrates slowly trickle into the bloodstream. That's what the scientists say. So vegetables first, protein, then carbs. And if you look at the green line here, you've got much less insulin, a lot less insulin. So you're going to be able to drop the body fat faster. You're going to be able to have better energy, more testosterone, more brain function. So that's the easiest way to start walking back insulin resistance. Now, there's more that you can do, as I mentioned here. The beautiful thing is that the way that our body gets the glucose out of the bloodstream, and we either use it or park it in the muscles as glycogen or in the liver as glycogen, are transporters, like this GLUT4 here. There's many different transporters. So I'm just going to focus in on one. So when you've got optimal thyroid hormone, namely T3 here, it puts more transporters on the muscle. So you've got much more transporters on the muscle there to get glucose out of the bloodstream and into the working muscle. So you got to optimize your thyroid hormone. I've got more information about how to do that below. And of course, testosterone does the same thing. So when we optimize our testosterone and our thyroid hormone, we're a long step in the right direction. The third and final thing we can do is fucking move. When we move, the muscles, fibers shear, and it opens up those transporters so we can get glucose out of the bloodstream. Now, remember when I said up here that for the first 4 hours of the day, cortisol's on the rise, and as cortisol goes up, we become insulin resistant. So if you exercise for just 10 to 15 minutes within the first hour of waking, that fixes that problem. And the science is pretty clear on that. So as you see here, this is average glucose over 24 hours. So worst case scenario here, average blood glucose is about 120, not very good. If you just do one bout of exercise late in the day, if you do one at about 10:30 in the morning, still not ideal because you didn't exercise within the first hour. So the blood glucose does come down, but it's not ideal. But if you exercise 3 times by 15 minutes or even 10 minutes, that's what we've seen in all the people that we've helped, you've got lower glucose again. Now, this is with people that had insulin resistance too. So that's pretty good. So that's the average blood glucose over a 24-hour period. So if you exercise, as I mentioned in the early part of the day, and you go out after your first meal, do 10 minutes of walking, your next meal, do 10 minutes of walking, you're a long step in the right direction. And what you'll find is your testosterone will come up. So you'll have better glucose tolerance, and your thyroid will start to work again. And again, it's a compounding effect. You will have more glucose transporters, so your glucose will optimize. And this study here really speaks to it. You've got under 4,000 steps per day, average testosterone, about there. About 12,000, it's probably around about there. So that's, close to 200 nanograms per deciliter by just doing more steps. So that really shows you that when you walk, when you do more steps, your blood glucose is much more stable. And that's the key to it all. And this really shows you why. This is everything that shuts down testosterone production. So if you've got hyperglycemia, high blood sugar, you shut down. If you've got low, you shut down. So a lot of people have got these big ups and downs, right? And we now know that to make testosterone, the thing that I'll focus in on is blood glucose. You need to normalize blood glucose. So we need stable blood glucose. None of these big ups and downs all over the place there. All right. So to wrap this up, what we want to move away from is the mental stress and everything that I've been speaking about, because that will cause a big rise in blood sugar, as you now know. We want to move away from this, and we want to move towards this stable blood glucose. And it is no joke, as Dr. J did a lot of his research for cholesterol on fasting blood glucose. We need to get it 85 and below. When you're above that, you're not optimal, and that's the point. Are you going to die really quickly if it's above that? No, right? But you're not optimized. Your testosterone is not optimized. Your fat loss is not optimized. You are subpar, and that's the point. So this, again, was a 22-year study of 2,000 people, and it's a significant study. Then we've also looked at the KPIs, the blood labs. So what's your objective? For me, it's to be in my prime for a long fucking time. So the blood labs are the metrics. And then once we see the blood labs, that creates a framework to know what to do. Then we create a strategy of what to do. And then you measure your performance over 2 to 3 months. Then you evaluate by repeating the objective, which is the measurements of the blood labs, rinse, repeat. And you'll find in 1, 2, 3, or even 4 rounds over 12, 6 to 18 months, you're eventually going to get there. You're going to have optimal everything, which is going to translate to you kicking ass in life. Because again, as Dr. Ken Berry said to me, you don't want to leave it too late.
Absolutely. It's often too late by the time you've become financially comfortable.
Yeah.
Very often you've done so much damage to every tiny artery in your body that you're now stuck with permanent erectile dysfunction, or permanent forgetfulness, or permanent insomnia, permanent shortness of breath, chest pain, right? Gut issues. You've done so much damage. Some of it can't be taken back. And that's why I'm so active on social media, constantly reaching out and trying to help people, because once it's too late, you might regain a little bit of that function, but it's never going to be like it once was, and it's never going to be like it could have been. Yeah. And that's very sad if you think about it, that somebody's basically handicapped for the rest of their life, physically or mentally or emotionally, because of bad dietary decisions that they made for the first few decades of their life that they didn't realize were bad decisions because they had never been trained properly.
Exactly. Got any questions? Drop in the comments below. One of the biggest things that grinds my gears is that they're just trying to normalize low testosterone, and we see it playing out in front of our eyes. It's been happening for a very long time, and we're suffering. We're suffering all of these consequences of low T. Decreased energy, vitality, well-being, and motivation. Shit. What kind of life are you going to have if you're constantly feeling like that? You know, I heard a very smart person say that 95% of the decisions that we make every single day is based on how we feel. And if we're putting up with low testosterone, we have decreased energy, vitality, well-being, and motivation. How can we possibly make strong decisions that are going to empower our life and the people around us? We're only letting our family down. We're only letting ourselves down. And we're going to get to a place, as Dr. Ken Berry said, where it's, too far, too late. You can walk back a little bit of that dysfunction, but it's never going to be as good as it once was or it could be. So don't put this off, legends. Get this right. So if you want any more information, drop a comment below. More than happy to help.